Hi to all you watercolor wizards, and this is Hajra. Thanks for joining me on this live stream. We haven't done a live stream in a long time. So today I'm going to be working on Bauer and Mucha studies, and this is a private Q&A session live stream just for patrons. I'm going to make it public later. And so I hope you brought your art projects or your art journals or your art questions and also your snacks so you can just settle in for a mellow art adventure. Thanks for parking your brushes here and let the epic painting adventures begin. I got macaroons and Elijah got them because I told him I was going to live stream and we wanted snacks. So we're going to be starting with a John Bauer study. So I'm going to be using this flat brush for the larger areas, a filbert for blending edges, quadruple 0 for details, and also this number 1, smallish areas but not teeny tiny areas. I may not even need the teeniest brush, so I've found often that I don't. I've got my little water thing here. It's a smaller one than the other one I have, but it has a dirty water side and a clean water side. I also have my spray bottle with some water in it. We're going to start with the Inktense blocks first, and these are my leftover Inktenses from when I did those rooster and hen ornaments, and so I have some leftover paint there that I can use as well. To make it faster, I'm just going to do them as a sort of vignette, so there's going to be a little bit of the cave that's on the ground underneath her. So yeah, I'm not going to do the whole cave background because it's not as brown as I wanted. I wanted it to be a little bit browner than that, so I'm doing this wet on wet, and that is really thick paint. Came down surprisingly thick, but it's alright. I'm going to just water it down. I actually want to spread it over her a lot of ways because she's mostly brown, and if we have a few different temperature browns there, the only thing that's not brown here is the princess. And because he used gouache, the way he used watercolor was that he did ink pieces just like I did this ink drawing. Then after that he did watercolor over it in these duller colors, and then he would come back and do some gouache. So I don't have to worry about preserving highlights because we're doing it his way, and his way is to not preserve any highlights and just come back with some gouache later. And yes, the Inktense, so you can see, is drawing in a hard edge. That'll stay hard because this is waterproof on paper. And I'm not too worried because I can correct with the gouache. And also, I'm just not very concerned about it because I feel like I'm going to layer more browns over it. I just love John Bauer's style. I was saying this in the Patreon post, which is that he really does have the kind of style where you feel like these creatures existed someplace, somewhere, and that, you know, there's just something that went extinct, like the dinosaurs or the dodo or something, you know? You just get that feeling from his pieces.
How many John Bauer pieces have you painted? I know you painted the bear and the girl. Is that the only other one?
That's the only other one, and I'm going to try to focus on more originals, so I think having a few studies by some of the favorite artists is more than enough for historical artists, and then just to concentrate on my own original pieces at some point. A lot of people love my studies, and I'm going to continue to post them, but despite having that historical background, I would like to do some of my own pieces as well and give that kind of original work more time, just because I haven't had the luxury to do that.
So your gouache will be just white or other muted colors?
Just white, the way that Bauer did it. So we're doing a study of Bauer's, and so I'm going to emulate how he did his pieces. And in his pieces, he did all of his muted grayish brown colors and, you know, almost monotone, basically, with the watercolor, and then he came back just with the white gouache for highlights. So, and that's probably, you know, what you want to do if you're doing a faithful rendition of a study. Now, you are totally welcome to. I mean, nobody's going to stop you if you go and decide to do other colors. I'm already making this more variegated in the browns than he did. What's really funny about it is it's this troll mom hanging out with this princess and telling her that she can choose one of her 3 sons as a husband. And the 3 sons are standing behind the mom in the original illustration. I didn't include them in this because it would have become a much bigger study. But they're like basically look like her but much bigger, and they're like in the back, 3 of them. And she's offering the princess to marry any one of her 3 handsome sons. And all of them are, you know, in her eyes, just amazing. And the poor princess is just sitting there stoically. And so she's not very worried, it seems like. Or she's just very stoic and good at hiding her panic, I guess. So I'm going to go ahead and work a bit more on these rocks, because what I actually want to do is put in all the dark punches pretty fast, because that's when people thought this is going to take a long time. It would take a long time if you're preserving whites. It's not going to take as long if you don't preserve any whites, you know, because then you can just come back with the white to get the highlights. And you should always have a good white on hand for that reason. And again, I'm using an ochre brown here, and it's much more lively and warm than the brown that he used, which is just a colder monochromatic sepia type painting that he's doing over there. I do like the variegated browns in my own piece, and I'm just going to do that anyway, even if he's not doing that in his, because I think it'll make good color temperature variation. Just going to throw it into the different boulders. I'm just doing it very randomly, and then eventually we will come back and choose temperatures for things and either darken it or lighten it or whatever. So I'm going to get the initial staining wash in, because this is basically a nice staining wash. And I don't think I want to go any further to give this area a little bit more balance and interest instead of ending in a straight line. And Bauer influenced a lot of modern artists like Brian Froud, Tony Dieter. I have seen lots of artists just doing exactly the same kind of thing with the same even layout and color schemes. I'll share that when I edit this and post this again so you guys can see a pop-up of what I'm talking about. But it's amazing how many people he's influenced, but he's not very well known to a lot of people in modern times. And a large part of it is probably because he died in a shipwreck when he was 36, and this is something else that I shared in that post on Patreon, which is that he sank to the bottom of Lake Baton with his wife and his infant son, who was only like 2. And it's because the ship was unsafely over-cargoed, and a lot of the cargo was stored on the deck. And so this is a November 1918 shipwreck in Sweden, and all 24 people on the ship died. He was very talented, and he was very young. I think he died when he was only 36. And he was known for his illustrations, and they were really immersed in Swedish mythology and folklore, and so he was actually getting a good reception for those in books and stuff, but he wanted to do something more than just what he thought was children's illustration, and as a result of that he wanted to do more fine art, and it was having an impact on his career and also his marriage. You know, one of the reasons they were going on that ship was so they could relocate and start a new life and everything, so it's really sad that it killed the whole family. And also it's really sad that the public made it into this horrible public spectacle, because all these people showed up and watched it like it was a bizarre entertainment thing, raising the ship and everything. They said 20,000 people or so showed up for that. The newspapers were saying, oh, this guy's ship got sank because the monsters and mythological creatures that he painted claimed him, so put it down to superstition and supernatural stuff, which of course is just bogus. So I'm going to go ahead and strap this down so it stays down at an angle now. Looks kind of like Fraggle Rock creatures. Labyrinth or Dark Crystal. Brian Froud was heavily influenced by John Bauer. And that's the thing about Inktense, is that, keep that in mind, is that it will dry where you put it and not move. It's like, it's an ink. It's an ink in a watercolor format, but it is a waterproof ink, so if you're not careful, you don't get the blends you want or the edges you want, you will end up with dried edges. So I'm doing what I always do, which is I have 2 brushes. I've got one brush for blending out edges and the other brush with my paint in it. It's also just more efficient for me. If you want to have 1 brush, if you want to have 2 brushes, if you want to have 5 brushes, that's totally up to you, but I'm showing you how I do it. It's not as important what I do, because at some point eventually you're going to end up having things that you like and that you do, and those are going to be your style of painting, and so I'm just a reference to some degree about what you can do, but you don't have to follow what I'm doing. You know, you might end up doing something completely different. So I'm trying to add a little bit more red to this brown here. Bear skins and everything hanging off of her, so it's all very exciting. But you can see how doing that staining wash at the beginning, it gets me started faster because there's less white to conquer, right? All that white is gone. I'm pretty sure he probably painted her brown too and then came back over it with the white. I'm just going to leave her that color because I feel like it'll be easier for me to work onto her and the colors that I want, and just leave her white because I happen to be doing a vignette. If I was doing a whole piece, then maybe it would be smarter to stain her brown too. Yeah, I don't even know what this is. It looks like some kind of giant blade. Some knife blade or something. I did another Tea Party piece. It's right here, but it was also a super fun and interesting piece to do as a study, and also to do with the Inktense, and it'll be nice to explain to you guys how you can do fabrics that are stylized in a golden age style, because these are not super realistic fabrics, but they have enough of that. This paper is not arches. I think this is Strathmore mixed media paper. Do the gouache on top of it to fix mistakes. I won't have to lift or blend as carefully, so you can use a paper like this. It's only when you're doing transparent watercolor and a lot of detailed layers that you have to get, pull out your arches and stuff. Those are the three colors that I'm using here, is just this ochre, this brown, and this black, and it's giving me enough value differences. And I can also exaggerate his values because, like I said, I'm using slightly more vibrant colors than his. Inktense also dries back duller. So this particular brand does. So my assumption is that if I make it darker, it'll dry back. That's what I've learned, is it'll dry back to the degree that I want it, versus if I try to make it exactly how I see it, it'll dry back, 20% or so, and then I'm going to have to come back with more layers. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've done that before, but since I'm in a live stream, I'm going to try to take the risk of making it erring on the side of being too dark. From one of my animal artist collective friends, and it was Denise. She was my secret Santa. We did a secret Santa where everybody...
That doesn't sound very secret.
It's not anymore. It's over, so it doesn't have to be a secret now. It's a great hybrid product. It is duller than fine artist watercolors and gouache, so keep that in mind. But the reason I'm using this is because I had it out, and because I got it recently. I did promise people that I'd give it a good college try to make sure that it works the same as the Inktense blocks, and so I think that's why I've used it for the last three pieces. So you can see I did her shoes wet on wet. To me, they just look like loaves of bread, don't they? They look to me like long loaves of bread. I think I'm going to have a vanilla macaroon. I'll give one to Elijah. And if you're snacking while you're painting, which is a lovely thing to do, then here's my first snack, which is a vanilla macaroon. And
Susie said cake. She loves the circular palette.
She doesn't have to love it that much. It's really horrible to use.
Oh, come on.
No, it really is one of the most inconvenient palettes I've ever had. It cost $80, and the wells are too small. And I know a lot of people have told me, well, you can just dab in there. And this is not a mixing palette because the person who sells it isn't selling it as a mixing palette. It says to get colors from there. I think even to get colors, if you look at this brush, this is a size 1 round. And this is a teeny, less than a 1/4 inch filbert. It's almost taking up the whole space, and the color contamination is very easy. I think it's definitely very pretty for pictures. And it's in fact the most expensive palette I ever had. All the other palettes I have cost like $20 or less, and they work much better. I did do it by reserving highlights, and what I would do is do it the slower watercolor way, which is what I'm doing right now, just to show you, and then soften the edge so that there is a highlight. But because I'm going to come back and do the highlights, I'm actually not going to care about reserving highlights areas in the rocks. I can just color them all one color, and then just come back and do the highlight with the white pen the same way that he did. Now, the other thing I would warn you about is that you might have to come back and do your ink lines over again, because some of these colors are a little bit opaque. They're not fully transparent. And that typically happens with ochres at the very least. An earth color, a mineral color, and the dirt that it's made out of can be opaque on the paper. He was living in an age where it had been readily available in a lot of colors, so it's not that he didn't have those colors, he just chose not to use them. But yes, nobody had as many colors as we have today, because we've got synthetic colors, and we've got dye colors, we've got pigments and minerals, we've got, all sorts of different colors. If we don't have available today, it's because they're no longer legal. I think Indian yellow was made by torturing cows by making them eat mango leaves and then collecting the urine and distilling the color, because they would make it so that there was this beautiful yellow color that resulted if you fed them nothing but mango leaves, but it was torture. So that's not legal anymore. But one of Vermeer's favorite colors was Indian yellow, and you can see it in a lot of his paintings, but now we have a synthetic replacement color for that. You can't really get the authentic thing now because, fortunately, we care more about animals' rights sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. So you can see I'm going ahead and putting in this white. And I've got a white gouache on hand, too, which I'm going to use right from my pan or my palette. But I'm doing this stippling in with this smaller pen just because it's handy and I happen to have it. I think this is the last pen I own, and I've gifted away a lot of the other ones, and as soon as this one is gone, I'll have no choice but to use just my paints, and that's fine. I did that for a long time. I've been trying to use up these pens for a while because they're essentially white gouache in a stick, and so you can use them for details. They do sort of dry out if you don't use them, so I have that panic of, okay, I've got to use this highlights in a few places to make some of these rocks sparkle. And I'm sure he did that too. He wasn't sitting here deliberating on each rock. So keep that in mind when you're doing something. Is a lot of what seems deliberate to us, some of these effects were just automatic and happening with the watercolor paint. So especially if you're using watercolor. A lot of it is spontaneous, so just go with the flow for some of this stuff, and as long as I'm not selling a forgery, it doesn't have to be exactly the same. Although I have had people confuse my paintings with the original artist work numerous times online, and I've had to tell people on various websites that that person is using a piece and labeling a piece that is not the original. And this is the same marker I did the inking with, so it's my Zig Writer. It's archival. These are the markers that I use. You can get microns, and microns are great for the actual archival quality and other things, but I've noticed that a lot of those other markers that have a metal tip at the bottom and then the little part comes out with the pigment on it, you have to hold them just at 90 degrees to use them. And you don't have to do that with this marker. You can use it at an angle and it still works. And I really like that because I've got hand pain from having joint hypermobility issues, as you guys know. So if I had to hold this the entire time at 90 degrees, I just wouldn't be able to use it. So it's nice that this marker, after some searching, I found you can use it at an angle and it works just fine. Her hair really is this Zentangle type thing where you can just get lost in the coloring of it. Little swirls and squiggles. She's got really nice hair for a troll. I don't know if she's got a hairband or a part or something there, but I can see that there's something indicated, and that's why I left it alone in the sketch initially. So I'm just going to leave that part there, and I don't know if it's just sort of a greasy sheen on her hair. I don't have any idea. Again, see how much help I'm getting from having that brown stain down there that I put in earlier on, and it took no time, and it was really fast, and it actually gets you started because it gives you a mid-tone basically, so it's like toning your paper. And because this is a vignette, I didn't tone all the way to the edges, but you can see that it's giving me a mid-tone to start with, and then I can go put in my darks and my highlights. And that's basically how you want to operate on a piece where you are using gouache white for highlights, is try to get your mid-tones down first and then your darkest values, and then come back and do the highlights. And you can do it any way you want. I can't make you do it any particular way, but that I've found for most people will make it easier.
Bauer said he wouldn't be able to draw this small without a magnifier.
Yeah, I don't know how long I'll be able to do this, Albert. Once my eyes start to give out, then I'll have to draw bigger. But one of the pros is that you get to finish faster because you're using less paper, less paint, and less overall drafting and coverage, right? Because it's a smaller piece of paper. But that's not going to help at all if you can't coordinate or see at such a small size. So yeah, you have to work at a size that works for you. If you work at a bigger size, you can do this piece perfectly fine. It'll just take a little bit longer to finish because your colors, there'll be more colors to apply and more space to cover, but it'll definitely be easier to draw because you won't have to have completely exact eye-hand coordination where you can't screw anything up. Her face is so teeny, you can see it's smaller than my pinky fingernail, and that happens to me so often with a lot of the faces of certain things that I'm painting where they end up smaller than my fingernail. So it's a kind of thing where you just have to say, can I do this? Is it going to be comfortable for me? And if it's not, then paint larger. Nothing wrong with that. I actually love the impressive impact of larger paintings. It's actually also easier to have a smaller piece because you can get it all on the camera much easier along with your palette and everything else. If I continue to do live streams, when I go to edit this later, if I like the quality of the video, then I will do more live streams. That's basically what it comes down to. It was because of Kat that I started putting the palette on the screen because she said, look, it would be nice for me to see how many paints you're dipping into and what you're dipping into and stuff. And I said, oh no, people don't want to see that. And she's like, yeah, they do.
Kat says these videos are terrible and you should start streaming video games.
Video games?
She didn't really say that.
Yeah, I didn't think she did. Okay, so I don't know what he's done here. It's kind of like a weird, cloudy, abstract mess. So I'm going to do the same thing. It's just like that whole thing of painting what you see and not what you know. That goes for a human hand or fingers or something abstract like this. It's like I'm literally just following exactly what I see, even if I don't know exactly what he was doing here. What I'm doing is just going to the bottom flaps of any of these things, and like I said, I don't even think he's done that with everything. I'm just choosing to do it myself and giving a little bit of a darker impression there before I blend out a soft edge, and it makes things look more dimensional without trying super hard to do much of anything else. Bauer's trolls weren't saints. They were mischievous and wild and kind of crazy, so I wouldn't be surprised if some of the ornaments here on old Mama Troll here are some kind of horrible tokens of defeating other people or such. So
Cat thinks it's a matchmaking charm.
Okay, so now I'm just going to darken up this entire area because you can see that it'll just make her head stand out more. And again, I've got my white gouache to help me retrieve some highlight. So I'm just going to, and it'll help make her hair and everything look like it's sitting on a darker base as well, instead of it looking more straggly like that. And he didn't paint around this stuff, he painted right over it. I'm painting around it just because I'm here and I can. I love this patchy, straggly, pebbly texture that's happening on this cellulose paper. You'll notice Alex Ross's pieces do that because he uses a Strathmore paper. This would be a great Halloween piece. Honestly, this is got such great mood. I love the earthy browns. Get the actual darker patches in, and I am going to make them a little bit darker, so I have to come back with a single pass. You guys might remember I did rocks with lots of different speckles and spots on them for the mermaid piece as well, and that was with the watercolor pencils.
Albert wants to know, are there two brushes used here, one with paint and the other with just water? And Kat said might be a second damp brush for blending.
Yep, that's what I always do. I always have one brush with my paint on it, and the other one is just damp and clean with water on it for blending. It's not always the same brush, so when I was using the smaller brush, this was the blending brush, and this was the brush with paint on it. But now that I'm using a larger area, this is the paintbrush, and this larger brush is now the blending brush. So as long as I've got those two going, it's fine, but they can change roles. It doesn't have to be one brush stuck in that role. But yeah, it's very useful to me anyway. I don't even know that I've ever seen anybody else do that. I think I always just did that because it was easy for me. I think I started out doing it actually because Schmincke paints were so expensive. And I started out painting with Schmincke paint several years ago, and I didn't want to keep rinsing the paint out of my brush because I thought this is going to waste the paint. After a while I realized that it was just very convenient for my technique because I blend a lot of edges. I have a lot of controlled and detailed pieces that need a lot of edge blending, and so as a result of that, it's something that I've just sort of kept at and continue to do.
Kat says you have to be quick to blend with ink.
Yeah, you do. You pretty much have to. That's the other reason why it's good to have this on hand, is it's not going to be something that'll work if you are too slow to get over to your water to blend a soft edge into ink. So with paint that sort of, sits down where it is and dries, you can see that's already happening with that because this is a waterproof ink product. So if I just did this and then went back to the water, it would take time. And even now, without doing that, you can see that it's already starting to set hard. The other way to do that with ink is to wet everything down first, like I'm doing here. That way you've got some water on the paper that gives you soft edges before you even come in to blend. I feel like I really like how the ochre shows up. Again, I have a damp brush on hand even when I'm using the white pen because the white pen is going to put it down in a pen line and I want it to look painterly. Temperature and value, contrast is always important. It doesn't matter if you're only using a few colors or just like literally one or two colors. Temperature contrast is still important. Now I'm going to take a little bit of this red brown now, and you see how it's up in the purse there and a little bit of her. I'm going to try to feed it into a few of these areas, and yeah, it means I'll have to come back and do the rocks over again, but it also means that I won't feel like that it doesn't occur anywhere in the midground, and I would like it to because I feel like it would give me better color harmony. This time this is partially a cellulose paper. This is a Strathmore mixed media paper. As I was saying to Susie, Susie who thinks she can just sneak into my house one of these days and throw all my cheaper paper away. But I'm trying to get through some of my cheaper papers because they do work for ink and wash. But yes, it's not going to be arches. The video,
Susie's only reply to your cruel implications was to type, quote, thinks.
Susie's gonna come over here, I know. She's gonna bring Randy over, and Randy's her dog, by the way, not some hired goon. And see how I'm patching in that white, and stipple in some of the actual white paint that I have there, and then use my blending brush, which has now become my filbert brush, right? Remember the changing of roles? It's like passing a baton to another runner. So the brushes will change roles. I just need one paint brush and one highlight scrubbing and blending brush, because I also use the same damp brush that I used for softening edges. I also use it for lifting. And this is also what I suggested to people about saving their more expensive sable brushes, which is that you can use your sable brush to lay down your paint and then use your nylon brush to scrub and lift and blend, and that'll also save you probably ever having to buy stapler brushes again. I know that the stapler brushes I bought are still the same brushes I have for several years, and I know that I'm sick, so sometimes I take painting breaks and only do a painting or so a week. That's also obviously affecting it, as I'm not doing giant paintings at a huge pace. But I have noticed that I have some brushes that I've had since probably high school or even earlier in middle school. They're going fine. Look at how much more dimension that adds to the rocks just to come back with a little bit of white. And that's the secret of dimension with additive painting. Additive painting is when you can go from light to dark, but also from dark to light, which is what happens when you include an opaque color like a gouache paint, or if you're painting just with gouache or oil or acrylic, you can have an additive thing. So that's why watercolor is actually harder in a lot of ways, is because it's usually subtractive. Now, in this case, this is an additive painting because I've incorporated both. If something goes wrong, you can just keep fixing it. That's not usually the case for watercolor pieces that don't have any opaque paints at all, you know? So it's kind of a luxury. Yeah, this is probably Holbein, because I've got the same giant tubes of white gouache that I have. If it was Holbein before in the other supplies video, then that's what it is now. And if it's not Holbein, then it's one of my Create-A-Color Aqua Sticks or Aqua Bricks. Those are the only gouache whites that I have. And if it feels much more like paste without any kind of oily quality, then it's the Holbein. But that's essentially the difference between the Aqua Sticks and a pure gouache, is that there's a slight touch of oil. And it is raining here still. It has been raining, and it has continued to rain. So if you hear stuff in the background, the rain. There's a lot of rain. I'm trying to leave a few areas of the ochre as well. And I'm trying to dry brush a bit, so you want to give everything a soft edge. So here, it looks like there's some sharp areas of highlights here where they're basically very bright white, almost like there's some kind of lichen or moss growing on these rocks, and that's how he painted it. So I'm going to go ahead and put a few spots of that, and I'm going to just determine whether or not I feel like it works for my painting. Because if it doesn't, I will deaden them down back a bit. And the nice thing about gouache and watercolor is, unlike ink, you can always come back and continue to lighten it. So I don't have to worry about the fact that I put that down earlier. The edges are still blendable. It's an open surface. That's what you call it when it stays mixable, is that it's an open surface. So just like oil is an open surface for several days, sometimes longer, depending on if you're not using any accelerator to dry it. It's the same thing with gouache and watercolor. Gouache especially, because gouache is very readily liftable. But watercolor is still correctable in a way that ink isn't. You can still lift and correct watercolor, even the staining colors, in a way that you can't if it's just a permanent ink. He did anthologies and fairy tales and storybooks and mythological pieces. He also did fine art, even though it wasn't well received. And more importantly, what I was saying was that after he died, people took his work and started using it for crappy things like soap advertisements. And so it was like, really disrespecting the original intentions of what he wanted for his work. So that happened after he was gone. One of his pictures is famous for some little girl sitting by a magic pond and looking into the pond with her hair around her, and it was like used for a shampoo or a soap advertisement, and it's like certainly not, I'm sure, something that would have made him happy, because that's not what he did it for. And like I said, she's got sort of an out of control charm bracelet on this side, and she's got, I don't know if that's coming from her ear. I know that there's some things coming from her ear on this side. So she's got a lot of little juju things, juju beads and voodoo beads and who knows what else going on over here.
So I guess she's a lady after your own heart, since she loves jewelry.
She loves accessories, yeah, I gotta say that. Just like I love accessories.
Does she have some kind of a troll fascinator?
She might. I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's just her, like I said, her greasy center part, or if it's a fascinator or something, or a headband or some sort of thing like that. Shares my love for accessories, but she and I do not have the same taste, I can tell you that much. And this pen, because it is got some kind of slightly different formula, it can be blended out, but only while it's still wet. If you wait till it's dried, then it doesn't move. At least that's been my experience. Okay, so I'm going to do these little lines here. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit of texture here. I can see it in his original. And he did it, sure, with a brush or a quill nib or a crow nib or something like that. And we're just going to use this pen because it's handy right here. I think anytime I look at one of his pieces, it just feels very magical. Give her a little bit of highlight in her eye. Looks like she's got some kind of textural highlights on her hands here that are following the direction of, looks like the hair growing on her hand, because she's a troll, so looks like she's got it all the way up there. And that's fine. Now I just want to add in, it looks like this is the end tendrils of this cloak, and he gave it some kind of little highlight aspects. And so I'm going to go ahead and throw that in. Even make it a little bit furry in the process because I've got convenience of having that pen. But again, see how going from the dark to the light and the light to the dark is a very handy way to paint instead of it always being just light to dark the way that we do in watercolor. You can just paint with watercolor and have like the one white with you. You don't even have to buy other gouache colors. And I've said this before, you can just use the gouache for highlights or go ahead and just use the white and mix it a little bit into your colors, or 1:6 ratio I should say, but at a 1/5 as a fraction quantity, so basically 20% or less, and that'll give your colors opacity without making them too diluted. Quite a bit of a highlight area down the center of her face here, and over here, and into this nose. Boy, she's got some nose, doesn't she? You don't have to draw this larger, it's already as large as it could possibly be. I don't know, I feel kind of bad for her. I know that the princess is not going to marry one of her sons, and so I just keep thinking to myself, well, I feel bad for her because, you know, she's got feelings too. But, I mean, I don't know if she's a mean troll or if she's going to be mean to the princess if the princess doesn't, you know, it all depends. But if her feelings are just hurt, then it makes me feel bad for her. And just blend the edges off with that. And that'll give you some of the white at the center and a little bit of a gradient. And like I said, this will dry back a bit duller because it's Inktense. She doesn't have every strand colored. He sort of like painted a little bit of yellow into the strands so that it looks like some of them are white and some of them are yellow. And I think it's because he was trying to go for this sort of like glowing look, and if he covered it all with 100% yellow, it wouldn't look like that. And now let me add even more ochre to that and do the crown part. Okay, let me know if it's come back on because I feel like...
Ken says it's back.
Okay, well, I don't understand why YouTube does that. That's not something I like, so I probably won't be doing as many live streams as I would if there wasn't this kind of problem. So as much as I love talking live to people, if YouTube is going to keep cutting out, I mean, it's one of the reasons why we stopped doing it 2 years ago for the live streams, is because it was really annoying that stuff cut off. Create a little bit of a halo effect with the gouache, putting it around her like this. He's making her sort of glow a bit, and you can create a great misty halo effect with gouache by just putting it down like this around something. And by that I just mean white. You can do it with a white watercolor. White watercolor and gouache are the same thing. That's what gouache is. It's just opaque watercolor, and a white will probably come with your paints anyway. But you can see how it's giving her a bit of a misty surrounding, and that's how he achieved it. And it would be on this side too, except for we stopped. But for the rest of the cave, we would have had that here, and so you can see that it's kind of bled out to all of these different areas where it's creating a bit of a halo effect. But okay, on to Mucha, so that...
Kat says not to rush the Mucha.
Oh, okay.
So do it as quick as you can.
Okay, you guys, so that's the Bauer piece that we managed to do quite a bit of. A card I got in the mail from Diane just today. It was beautiful. It says Happy New Year, and it's just a little bit of her original art, and it's just gorgeous. So thank you so much to Diane. I'm gonna actually frame this. It means a lot to me and makes me feel like a few very special friends care, you know? It's very sweet. Like I said before, keep an eye out for this piece on YouTube next week. So for Mucha, before we get started, I wanted to quickly say that you guys have seen me do some of these coloring book pages that I did because people wanted to see just how to like basically paint on coloring book pages. And so this is the one I did with watercolor ground, and it got really messy. It didn't paint well because the watercolor ground really wouldn't accept the paint. And this is another fail with that watercolor ground. This one was more successful. This one is without watercolor ground, priming this paper of the coloring book page, which is just cheap cardstock. And I did that with watercolor pencil or aqua sticks, or probably a combination of both, and it's on a video from a few years ago. It's in the Patreon post about Mucha, so you can find this video and also this video on YouTube through the Patreon links. And apart from that, I've also done numerous watercolor studies that are original pieces, so you can tell the difference because this one has that coloring book page size and also the lines from the coloring book. And then there's pieces like this one where I just did a watercolor study on arches. So this is arches paper, and I had it on a long block, and you can see just how much finer the blends and stuff are, and very fine faces that you can get. And then I did a few other pieces that were also paintings, and you can again see the difference between the lines that you can see in a coloring book versus your own ink lines. And I ended up doing a lot of these. I think I'm gonna end up sending these as patron gifts later in the year, is giving people these Mucha studies, because I think I might end up with enough to be able to send them out. So I did that one on the December live stream on Hangouts that you guys saw if you were there. And then I had a few pieces inked up. I did this one and this one and this one. So I think I'm going to start with taking a vote as to which one I should paint. Some kind of Society of Arts poster that he did. And I think this is winter, so saying this is one of his winter paintings to show the different seasons, so this is his winter personified. And this one is a profile of Sarah Bernhardt, a theater actress that he got famous for doing posters for. But this is a recorded video. Sometimes I put up the original in the corner here so you guys can see what the original looked like. This is live, so you guys have to open your own reference. It's in that Patreon link if you guys have that. I think we're gonna go with gouache now. And this is also cardstock. Okay, and immediately giving you a Caucasian skin tone. And again, I went through a lot of trouble to do the ink sketch, and I mean with pencil first and then with the inking. I did it with the chocolate colored zig marker, so it's actually a dark brown, and I also used both sides of the marker, so you can see that I tried to emulate how Mucha did the darker and thicker lines and also the thinner lines, so did both there. And I'm gonna wait till this is completely dry for the skin to come back and do a little bit of skin areas. He really did stylize quite a bit, and if you feel like a lot of this stuff looks like it's posed from photos, it's because it is. He was very heavily interested in the use of photography for assisting him in his painting, so he did that a lot. And he's also heavily influenced by mural painters. I think there's a little bit of skin showing through this hair. I'll pop that in here. I don't know if I want to keep the hair just this orange or if I want to add a little bit more red to it. Let's see, make her more of a redhead in that vein, but he used very light pastel colors actually, so that was one of the things I was saying to other people before, is that he was not as much of a bright colorist as you would expect from somebody who's doing a lot of other loud decorative stuff. And I did a combination of gouache and watercolor on this, and then later on I made it just gouache, and that's why it has the thicker stuff, so I'm probably going to end up doing the same thing with this. I think I'm liking just the ginger with the orange here, so I think I'm going to leave it like that. So I'd like to do a few of his pieces in watercolor pencil, and some of them in gouache, some of them in watercolor, some of them in Inktense, just so you can kind of see the difference between the mediums with the same studies. It's also got very broad areas of color, and it's very satisfying. And he doesn't have it in his poster, and I'm doing it because I feel like it'll make it more interesting. And that is just to come in here, streak a few colors. And doing it while it's partially wet will give me a bit of dissolve, kind of what I want. Scumbly with your strokes, which means that try to vary the angles at which you're putting the brush down. It doesn't look like they were all put in like with a trowel or like with a paint roller on a wall. You know, you want them to have multi-directional feel to them. Multi-tonality that you see in hair, because he was not doing realistic hair, he was doing stylized, but we can still play around with the multi-tonality of it by having a bit of temperature contrast and value contrast and doing it like wet on wet. A little bit of a magenta. And this is Creta Color Aqua Brick Gouache, that's what it is. And take my damp brush and blend the edge out.
Albert wants to know, do you mix gouache and watercolor pigments on the palette?
You can, but if you mix watercolor and gouache, your end result will be just gouache, because the staining, transparent nature of watercolor will be overpowered by the opaque nature of gouache. So if you mix watercolor and gouache together on a palette, you'll just end up with gouache. If you want to use them separately and keep their own properties, and you can use them separately on the paper, like you can do a background in watercolor, and then you can come back and do the foreground or the subject in gouache, do a background in gouache and do the foreground in watercolor. But as soon as you mix them on the page, everything becomes gouache. And as soon as you mix them in the palette, everything becomes gouache, because like I said, gouache is the stronger of the two because of its opacity. So if you want to retain any of the transparent qualities, then you have to keep them separate. So it depends on what you're going for, basically. My favorite way to mix watercolor and gouache is to use watercolor for a background and then to do the subject in gouache, because gouache is called body color because it's more opaque, that's why it has that name. And so it'll actually be more opaque and look like the subject has more body and weight if you use it, and the backgrounds in watercolor will make it look more realistic. The other way that I like to use it is do watercolor for everything and then just have some white gouache highlights, pretty much like how we were doing on the Bauer piece. And that's different how than we do traditional watercolor. So like for this piece, all the lights we see here, and this watercolor piece are all the white of the paper. There's no gouache here, and you're getting such a glow, but it's just the paper. And all of that is just the paper. There's no gouache here at all over a watercolor piece with the highlights, and then, you know, it'll give you a different look. Again, I'm making up the shading here, so you can go ahead and do that on your own piece if you want as well. Because basically if you have a gradient where a petal is going from dark to light and you've got them juxtaposed next to other ones where you can see that value contrast, that's usually enough for a cheap, fast flower that reads well. Cheat your way into having a relatively realistic looking flower without having a reference. Can you paint without reference? Sure you can, but you have to have done enough flowers, or enough people, or enough something to have that in your mind's memory bank. You can't just do it without that kind of help. People like Mucha and Leyendecker and Maxwell Parrish, they always use reference. So, and a large part of that is the notion that you can't improve on nature. So if you have a reference, you're always following nature, because no matter how good your memory, you're still going to forget something, and then when you paint it, it's going to look inaccurate. And that's definitely not true for something like a flower. We can totally fudge our way through something like that. But when it comes to a person, if you want the proper verisimilitude and look of a person, then usually a reference is a good idea. Of course, like I said, if you've done enough people, you might have in your memory a sort of stock photo of a generic person that you can use in a pinch, but whole garbage in, garbage out. Your art's only as good as your reference, as some people say. And now I'm going to use some of the same magenta, because I have happened to use it already, and also the red and the orange, because I used it for the hair for her face. Usually you've done more realistic pieces that require a lot more actual color and blending, and this is not going to be one of those pieces. This is going to be one of those pieces that has a more minimal look to it, because he's got such a soft, powdery look to this person. You give a little bit of an eyelid and lower lid shadow, magenta in her nostril, and I'm going to wait for that to dry and come back with some brown as well into the brow. And remember what I said about brows? You shouldn't have hard edges. They're not painted on. Whether it's in real life or in a painting, painted on eyebrows don't look natural. I'm going to go ahead and put it here, all the way up to here, to create a nose bridge. And then I'm going to come back and lighten it out. And does that mean I'm going to have to come back for some of the ink lines? Yes, because some of the ink lines are being swallowed up by the opaque gouache paint. Pinky magenta up here. I'm giving her a little bit of a lid line, creases in the lid.
Kat wants to know who the influences were on Mucha's style.
Mural painters that he met in Prague and France, and also photography, photograph models and stuff. And his other big influence was Islamic art, because he was very interested in doing all of these arabesques and swirly things, vegetal and geometric designs, floral stuff. All that comes from Byzantine influences, which is Islamic art influences, for the arabesques and the vegetal, floral, and geometric designs, and all the sort of swirly twirly stuff that you see in Islamic art. He did everything from jewelry to furniture, murals, poster illustrations, oil paintings that he did for the Slav epic, which were historical paintings that he did of the Czechs and the Slavs. Big body of work that he created, everything from jewelry to wallpaper to like stained glass windows. It's always sad to me how he got interrogated by the Germans. He was a Slav, he was nationalist, and he was a prime target to be interrogated, and they did interrogate him for several days, and it ruined his health. And after he got out, he had pneumonia, and he died of it a few weeks later. Influenced the entire era where he was living. He became emblematic for Art Nouveau, but he was not remembered after his death, even by his own countrymen, that he was so nationalist towards. And he was forgotten for a long time. It was considered out of style and out of date, his paintings, by the time he passed away. 25 years after his death, his son got his stuff up at an exhibition in Prague for the Slav epic. He's one of the lucky ones, because he's got a lot more popularity today than a lot of other people who were working during his time. The stuff that people like is his posters, because he actually thought his oil paintings that had to do with historical topics and philosophical topics and nationalistic topics, he thought that was his best work. You can see I'm going full gouache mode for the face here, just like I did before. Temperature variation to indicate that you're traveling from one plane to another, and that's what I'm doing here. And I was saying this before about the other piece, is that these pieces don't have that kind of color and temperature detail, and I usually do that to add more interest to the gouache studies. It depends on the look that we're going for. Roman nose with a pointed bridge, so draw in this older style, and it is not a modern look, you know, it's definitely a great look for women. It's orange too, just the bottom part of the lip. It'll give it a little bit more dimension. Separate the lip using color temperature and not with any kind of ink line. Again, this is something that I'm doing that I don't see as much in his piece, but I think it adds great verisimilitude for having planes that are warmer and cooler. So I'll do cooler planes and these receding planes, the ones that are towards the bottom. It's one of the things that I've told you guys you can do for shadow areas. Warmer colors on the top planes. A little bit of a plane differentiation. I just wanted to make it look like her hands receding into shadow there. So I don't want people to show up and then get booted off, and it's all YouTube's fault, but it makes an audience unhappy with me. I don't know if I'm gonna do more live streams. That if we can't do a live stream, then you can always just do a longer video that's closer to real time, talking about all the same stuff, and you guys can leave comments there and I can still answer them and everything. And I've already reduced the amount I speed up my videos. I don't know if you guys noticed, but I used to be sped up to like 20 times. Now I only speed them up like 3 or 4 times, so it's like only 3 or 4 times faster than normal speed. They've actually gotten slower anyway. And the beauty of doing an ink and wash piece with ink and watercolor or ink and gouache is that, you know what, it finishes up pretty fast because a lot of the rendering has happened in the ink stage. And I said that to you guys before, which is that when you have the ink to pull it together, then really the rest of it can go pretty fast. So I've added a little bit of cool temperature contrast again to this, making his piece a little bit more complicated than it is initially, but it's because I'm doing the same. One plane is lighter, warmer, and the other plane is cooler and darker. And that works really well with shadows, and of course yellow and violet are complements, so that's also a perfect reason to use them together like this. And plus I used violet in other places in this piece. I'll have the chocolate one because we'll say goodbye to the heart and we'll save the birthday cake flavor for last. I never talk with my mouth full now. I feel like a total cretin. Okay, how about this? I'll just paint a little bit of the background and then I'll stop when I'm tired. How's that? Probably a yellow, just because it's one of the only colors left that we are using. You can do whatever you want. I can't stop you, but I found harmonious color schemes work best in 1 to 6 colors. So I'm trying to focus on using some of the same colors I've already used and not branch out into pulling out more colors because it just isn't going to be harmonious. So I've got that yellow in. And this tin's actually from Cat. Okay, and I have my colors in it. So here's the magenta that I was using, and I'm just going to drop it into there. I think that should be enough for my purposes. Funny, all of these stars look kind of like the Star of David, huh? The way that they're positioned and everything. That's what they look like. Like I said, Mucha was Czechoslovakian and Slavic, but he was actually a devout Catholic. He came from a Catholic family. With most of these, I feel like the shadow is just coming from underneath the petal. Variation, you can start it in a different direction.
Kat suggested that maybe Sarah Bernhardt was Jewish.
Oh yeah, probably was, with that name. Yeah, well, like I was saying before, the Nazis were real dogs. They just hated everybody. And I just don't know how you could take somebody as talented as him. Because they were actually known to be, like, art connoisseurs. So you would expect that they'd see Mucha and leave him alone. Because they did that for some of these other people who were great artists or musicians. But yeah, I think one of the things I really like about Patreon is how it's allowed me to have, like, posts where I can put all that information. So I really like that I can do the deconstructed painting posts and also that I can do other information posts and sketch downloads. So it's a nice place to have like a blog basically, you know, and art information blog. And I'm not going to make it fully opaque, just like we did with the yellow back there up here, as it's not fully opaque. So I did that, and I think I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so it looks like if I do a quicker pass, it doesn't smear as much. That's probably because I don't have it down at full opacity, so let's try to do this fast. This feels like that bird purse. Don't do wet washes over gouache, it's not a good idea. I've got some Eastern European Jewish ancestry on my mom's side. Ashkenazi Jewish. Finally, actually make a dull purple. Really, really dull. And put it here. And then I can come back later and do something with the stars. Maybe just pick out a few highlights and then with the white gouache pen. It's pretty fast to finish this up, like I said, once you've got all the ink in place. Like I said, this paper has no sizing because it's cardstock, so it's really nice to be using the gouache or the Crater colors on here because it makes it so that you get to have this really cool blending that happens because of the actual paint and not because of the sizing, because like I said, there is no sizing, so you don't use watercolor on cardstock unless you're doing something super simple. It's not gonna give you nice blends. So this is the color that I'm going to end up doing so it contrasts better, and I'm going to do that later. I'm just showing that to you guys now for one star so that you can see that, and when I edit the video people know where I'm going with that. I'm going to do the same thing with the dark purple stars up there, and then for these stars what I was going to do was I was going to come in and add a little bit of a highlight, and a little bit of another highlight white to these central stars and give them a little bit of dimension. So that's how I'm going to finish the rest of this piece. This is where I'm going to stop now, just to rest my hands. Had a lot of fun, and I just wish that stream quality was better, that it would be easier to commit to that because of that. I'll look at the video quality anyway later, and then I'll try to put up real-time videos for people who want them, and just make sure I have longer and shorter videos on YouTube so that people can get that help. And also we're going to have longer videos on Skillshare as well. Thanks so much to all of you guys who decided to show up and park your brushes here. Wishing you guys all epic art adventures until next time.